Now, very own Nasiphi Same is getting more reaction to this story and joins us now live from Cape Town. Nasiphi, I know you'll be joined by Professor Ruth Hall in a moment as well. And I suppose the question I'm very interested in when it comes to all of this really is, does it matter the influence that the United States has on the world in this matter? Does it actually matter what the US says, and why should South Africa take heed at all?
Well, that's a very important question, and fortunately for us, we do have Professor Ruth Hall from UWC Institute for Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies. She is the acting director there to answer those all-important questions as far as should it matter, what are the implications, and also the tweet by US President Donald Trump, referring to the Expropriation Act as confiscation of land and the distinction there, and she will be able to contextualize this for us. I'm now joined by Prof. Ruth. Thank you so much for your time. But should it matter? You know, the tweet by Donald Trump saying that he will be stopping and cutting off funding to South Africa.
Well, I think that when the president of the largest economy in the world speaks, it does matter. But let's contextualize this. Firstly, he is taking immediate action based on very patchy information. He's incorrect by saying that South Africa is embarking on confiscation of land. That is not true. Confiscation is where property is taken without any due process. It's simply taken away without the rule of law. Expropriation is a very clear legal process, and that is precisely what South Africa has. We have an Expropriation Act that has been passed after more than a decade of legal processes and endorsement by a democratically elected parliament. It is in line with the Constitution, which is a democratic framework. So I think that everybody is concerned, partly because when Donald Trump makes decisions, he doesn't go through a formal process. He moves straight from an idea to an action. But I think, firstly, we must clarify he is factually incorrect when he says that South Africa is embarking on confiscation. We have an Expropriation Act, and it is a process that is set out that is in line with our Constitution. It's about due administrative justice, and it is about the rule of law.
On that note, does the US have any leg to stand on when it comes to the policies, the domestic policies of South Africa, particularly the one of the Expropriation Act, which was signed into law just a couple of weeks ago?
Well, you know, when President Trump says he wants to cut off funding to South Africa, let's be clear, first of all, the US government does not in any way fund or support land reform programs in South Africa. So it's not like they're directly funding this. But there are wider programs, and already those have been affected by his cuts, for instance, in health. So the cutting of aid and the cutting of support for South Africa and for many other countries in the world is already well underway. I think that what is more concerning here is that this is a direct retaliatory act which is based on incorrect information and is being embarked upon as a form of effectively bullying a democratic state that has adopted a law in tune with our democratic demands as citizens and through due legal process. One point that I would want to throw back to President Trump is that he may not be aware, but his own government does precisely this. They also have expropriation laws in America, and the US government does expropriate property. In fact, it also has, under the Fifth Amendment in the US Constitution, a requirement that when the state expropriates, it must pay just compensation. In our case, the Expropriation Act that he is so upset about also talks about just and equitable compensation. So, you know, I think that there is a point at which the facts don't seem to matter. And that is the worrying thing about both fake news and a president who acts upon fake news. What I am encouraged by is the fact that our president has responded timeously, and no doubt he will re-emphasize this point again when we hear the State of the Nation address later this week.
Could there have been diplomatic ways for the two presidents to engage on this particular matter?
First of all, I'm not sure that Donald Trump is particularly concerned about land and transformation in South Africa. It's a pity, he didn't invite our president to his inauguration, but they have both been at the World Economic Forum. I think that more generally, I think that we can anticipate an era in which, ideas, fake news, policy positions are just dealt with in an ad hoc way. Clearly, the challenge for all heads of state, for all political systems around the world at this point is to hold the line and to continue to be true to the citizens of their own countries rather than to sway with the mood of an American president. And this is difficult, of course, when there are retaliatory kinds of behaviors like this. But I think that, this is a time for solidarity across citizens around the world who want to defend and retain our democratic systems and our rights and our own programs of transformation. And I think that that is a key challenge for us all, is also to hold our own government to account, especially when being put under undue pressure of this kind.
Do you think there's perhaps implications elsewhere if you're saying that looking at the tweet and the fact that we do not receive direct aid when it comes to land reform in our country, are there perhaps, other implications like the agricultural sector, trade and the likes?
Well, I think that for many African states, particularly, the status of AGOA, which provides African states with preferential terms to export to the US, that is a major worry. And the fact that national policies and laws can be held up as an excuse or a reason to cancel those kinds of trade agreements, that is a serious worry. And I think in the longer term, perhaps we need to think about the ways in which this kind of very rapid, undemocratic type of set of executive decisions that are being taken, they may wear off, and then perhaps the real costs and possibilities will become clearer. But at present, I think that what's clear is that any program that aims to challenge inequalities, to address fundamental questions of equity in society, can easily be put under threat, partly through the influence of media people, billionaires, and others who influence the US president. Deeply worrying, but we are certainly not alone in this.
The signing of the expropriation bill into an act now, I would say polarized some political parties, those that are for, those that are against, and some organizations as well. It is quite still a fresh piece of legislation. Do you think that perhaps more education needs to be done as so far as the Expropriation Act itself, the framework, and what it's all about?
Well, I think there's a certain narrative that has been put out there that the Expropriation Act is a radical act, that it is a radical law that will involve the state seizing land from private property owners to redistribute it at scale and rapidly. I think nothing could be further than from the truth. Expropriation is a very lengthy, long process. The longer this law went through Parliament, which, by the way, it started in 2008, and it was only signed into law 2 weeks ago. So through that process, there's been so much opposition to it, influenced by certain political parties, property owner interest groups, and others, who have tried to ensure that there are lots and lots of administrative steps. It's a very bureaucratic process to expropriate. Many of us are concerned that the state may not be able to expropriate at all because it is such an onerous set of requirements. So I don't think that we should expect any rapid change because of the Expropriation Act. In fact, rather the opposite. I think that the narrative has been about the state wanting to seize property. But everything we've seen up to now is that the state is very hesitant. And there's an important additional piece of law that is still needed. And I'm very glad to say that the Minister, Mzwanele Nyonso, Minister of Rural Development and Land Reform, has announced that he is going to pursue the idea of a land redistribution bill, which is rather different from expropriation. Instead of being about the state being able to take property from private owners, it is actually about the rights of citizens to say to the state, we are landless, we have nowhere to live. Anywhere we go, we will be criminalized for breaking the law because we're squatting. And that law is actually about clarifying the entitlements of citizens to have a place to be. and the onus being on the state to respond to them. And so I think that these two laws together need to be part of a new dispensation where it's not just about the state expropriating, but also citizens being able to hold the state to account.
We'd possibly speak the whole day about this particular act. That is Prof. Ruth Hall from UWC Institute for Poverty, Land and Agrarian Studies. She is the acting director there, speaking about what has been making the news since this morning regarding the tweet made by US President Donald Trump regarding the Expropriation Act, referring to it or reducing it to government wanting to confiscate land, saying, Prof. Ruth rather is saying that that is far from the truth.